My name is Darius, and at 16 years old, I became the youngest shot caller in the history of the bounty hunter bloods in Watts. What I'm about to tell you will shake you to your core, because it's not just about gang life, it's about what happens when a child is forced to make life and death decisions that grown men can't handle. For 3 years, I controlled territory worth millions, commanded respect from OGs twice my age, and had the power to order hits with a simple nod. But the price I paid for that power almost destroyed everything I loved. The night I became shot caller wasn't because I was the smartest or the toughest. It was because I was the only one left alive. And the decision that made me a legend in Watts is the same decision that haunts me every single night. If you think you know what real power looks like, if you think being young means being powerless, you're about to learn why sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody sees coming. Before we go any deeper, let me be crystal clear about why I'm telling this story. I'm not here to glorify gang life or make it sound cool. I'm here to warn you about the real cost of power when it comes too early and too fast. For 3 years, from age 16 to 19, I ran operations for the bounty hunter bloods in the Jordan Downs housing projects. I controlled drug corners from Imperial Highway to Century Boulevard, managed a crew of over 40 soldiers, and made decisions that affected hundreds of families in Watts. The red bandana I wore wasn't just a piece of cloth. It was a symbol of authority that could start wars or end them. When I walked through the projects, grown men stepped aside. When I spoke, people listened. When I gave an order, it was carried out without question. But what the streets don't tell you is that power without wisdom is a curse. And when you're 16 years old, you don't have the wisdom to handle life and death decisions. Every choice I made rippled through the community like stones thrown in water, and some of those ripples turned into tsunamis that destroyed innocent lives. I grew up in the Jordan Downs housing projects, one of the most notorious public housing developments in Los Angeles. My mother worked double shifts as a nurse's aide, trying to keep food on the table and hope alive in a place where hope went to die. My father was never in the picture. Just another casualty of the streets before I was old enough to remember his face. Jordan Downs wasn't just my neighborhood. It was bounty hunter blood territory, and that meant something. It meant protection, it meant identity, and it meant that from the moment you could walk, you were either with them or against them. I remember being 8 years old and watching the older boys throw up blood signs, seeing the respect in people's eyes when they walked by. They had money when nobody else did. They had power when everyone else felt powerless, and most importantly, they had each other's backs in a world that seemed designed to tear us apart. My mother tried to shield me from it, working extra hours to send me to a school outside the projects, but you can't escape your environment when you have to come home to it every night. The streets were calling, and by the time I turned 13, I was ready to answer. Everything changed the summer I turned 14. There was a war brewing between the bounty hunter bloods and the Grape Street Watts Crips, and tensions in the projects were at an all-time high. One evening I was walking home from the corner store when I witnessed something that would alter the course of my life forever. A group of Grape Street Crips had somehow made it deep into our territory, and they were confronting one of our OGs, a man named Big Red who had been like a father figure to many of us. They had him outnumbered 4-1, and it was clear they weren't there to talk. Without thinking, I picked up a brick and threw it as hard as I could, hitting one of the Crips in the back of the head. The distraction gave Big Red the chance he needed to reach for his weapon, and within seconds, the whole situation erupted into chaos. When the smoke cleared, 2 Crips were down, and Big Red was looking at me with a mixture of respect and concern. "Little homie," he said, "you just saved my life, but you also just painted a target on your back. From now on, you're family, and family protects family." That night he handed me my first red bandana and told me I had a choice to make: join the set officially or leave Watts forever for my own safety. My initiation into the bounty hunter bloods happened on a hot August night in the courtyard of Jordan Downs. They called it getting blessed in, a ritual that would test my courage, my loyalty, and my willingness to bleed for the set. I stood in the center of a circle formed by 20 blood members, each one ready to test my heart. The rules were simple: survive 3 minutes of getting jumped by 5 OGs, stay on your feet, and prove you belonged. When Big Red gave the signal, fists started flying from every direction. My nose broke in the first 30 seconds, Blood filled my mouth and my vision blurred, but I kept swinging back. I kept fighting. Every time I went down, I got back up. Every time they knocked the wind out of me, I found a way to breathe. When those 3 minutes were over, I was still standing, barely, but standing. That's when they handed me my first gun, a .38 Special with scratched-off serial numbers. "This is your new best friend," Big Red told me. "It's going to keep you alive and it's going to earn you respect. But remember, once you pull that trigger for the set, there's no going back. You're bounty hunter for life." I was 14 years old, holding a gun, surrounded by my new brothers, and I felt like I had finally found my purpose. I had no idea I had just signed away my childhood. The first year as a bounty hunter blood was like attending a university of street knowledge. I learned the hierarchy, the codes, the territories, and most importantly, how to survive in a world where respect was everything and disrespect could get you killed. Big Red took me under his wing, teaching me how to read people, how to spot enemies, how to move through the streets without drawing unwanted attention. I started small, lookout duty during drug transactions, delivering messages between different sets, proving my loyalty through small acts of service. But the streets have a way of escalating quickly, and by my 15th birthday, I was carrying out more serious responsibilities. My first real test came when a rival gang member was caught selling drugs on our corner. Big Red handed me my gun and told me to handle it. "This is what separates the real from the fake," he said. "You can talk about being blood all day, but when it's time to protect the neighborhood, can you pull that trigger?" I found the rival that night, cornered him in an alley behind the liquor store, and for the first time in my life, I pointed a gun at another human being with the intent to use it. The power I felt in that moment was intoxicating and terrifying at the same time. After proving myself in that first confrontation, my status within the bounty hunter bloods began to rise rapidly. Big Red started giving me more responsibility, managing younger members, overseeing drug operations, and most importantly, making tactical decisions during conflicts with rival sets. By age 15, I was what they called a little shot caller. Not quite an OG, but someone whose opinion mattered when important decisions were being made. The money started flowing in from drug sales, protection rackets, and other illegal activities. I was making more in a week than my mother made in a month, and I made sure she never wanted for anything. New clothes, better food, bills paid on time. I convinced myself I was taking care of my family, being the man of the house. What I didn't realize was that every dollar I brought home was stained with blood, and every decision I made was pulling me deeper into a world where violence was the only currency that mattered. The other kids in the project started looking at me differently. I wasn't just Darius anymore. I was someone to be feared, respected, and followed. The power was addictive, and I was becoming addicted to the feeling of being important, of being needed, of being in control. The war between the bounty hunter bloods and various Crips sets intensified throughout my 15th year. What started as isolated incidents escalated into a full-scale territorial conflict that would claim dozens of lives and reshape the power dynamics in Watts. As one of the younger leaders, I was often tasked with planning and executing retaliatory strikes against enemy territory. I studied maps of the neighborhood like a military strategist, learning every alley, every escape route, every vantage point that could give us an advantage. The violence became routine. Drive-by shootings, ambushes, territorial raids that left families mourning and communities terrorized. But in the twisted logic of gang warfare, each successful operation increased my reputation and solidified my position within the set. Other blood sets started requesting my involvement in their conflicts, recognizing that despite my age, I had a strategic mind and the ruthlessness necessary to get results. By 16, I was coordinating operations across multiple neighborhoods, managing alliances with other sets, and making decisions that affected hundreds of gang members throughout South Central Los Angeles. The weight of that responsibility should have crushed me, but instead, it made me feel invincible. Everything changed on a cold February night when I was 16 years old. The Grape Street Crips had been planning a major offensive against our territory, and we had received intelligence about a meeting where their leadership would be gathering to finalize their attack plans. Big Red assembled a team of our most trusted soldiers for what was supposed to be a preemptive strike that would cripple their ability to wage war against us. I was chosen to lead the tactical planning, a responsibility that filled me with pride and terror in equal measure. We spent hours preparing, studying the target location, planning our approach, coordinating our escape routes. Everything seemed perfect, every detail accounted for. But as we moved into position that night, something felt wrong. The streets were too quiet, the target building too exposed, the whole situation too convenient. I tried to voice my concerns to Big Red, but he was focused on the potential glory of eliminating multiple enemy leaders in one operation. Against my better judgment, I followed orders and led the team into what I now realize was a carefully orchestrated trap. The ambush that followed would change everything, not just for me, but for the entire power structure of the Bounty Hunter Bloods. The moment we entered that building, I knew we had walked into a death trap. The Grape Street Crips were waiting for us, positioned at every exit, armed and ready for war. What was supposed to be a surprise attack on their leadership meeting had become a coordinated ambush designed to eliminate our leadership. The gunfire erupted from every direction, muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness like deadly fireworks. In the chaos that followed, I watched my brothers fall one by one. Big Red, the man who had been like a father to me, took 3 bullets to the chest while trying to cover our retreat. Marcus, my closest friend and fellow soldier, was cut down while attempting to reach a window. Within minutes, 7 of our best fighters were dead or dying, and I found myself trapped in a back room with nowhere to run. The sound of approaching footsteps told me that the Crips were moving in for the final kill, ready to finish what they had started. But something inside me snapped in that moment. Not fear, not panic, but a cold, calculating rage that I had never experienced before. I realized that if I was going to die, I was going to take as many of them with me as possible. What happened next would earn me a reputation that would follow me for the rest of my life. In that back room, surrounded by the bodies of my fallen brothers and facing certain death, I made a decision that would define the rest of my teenage years. Instead of waiting for the Crips to come to me, I decided to go to them. Using the chaos and confusion to my advantage, I managed to outflank their positions and turn the ambush back on them. The details of what happened next are too graphic to share, but when the smoke cleared, 5 Crip soldiers were dead, and I had somehow managed to escape with my life. More importantly, I had recovered critical intelligence about their future operations and the location of their weapons cache. When I made it back to Jordan Downs that night, covered in blood and carrying information that would allow us to strike back decisively, the remaining OGs looked at me with a mixture of awe and respect that I had never seen before. "Little homie just became a legend," one of them said. 16 years old, and he just single-handedly turned a massacre into a victory. That night, in an emergency meeting of the surviving bounty hunter leadership, I was officially promoted to shot caller, the youngest in the history of our set. The vote was unanimous. At 16, I had become one of the most powerful teenagers in Watts. Being the youngest shot caller in bounty hunter blood history came with privileges and burdens that no 16-year-old should have to handle. Suddenly, I was making decisions about territory, drug operations, alliances, and most terrifyingly, life and death. Other gang members twice my age were coming to me for orders, seeking my approval for operations, asking my permission to handle disputes. The weight of that responsibility was crushing, but I couldn't show weakness. In the gang world, any sign of uncertainty or hesitation can be interpreted as a lack of leadership, and weak leaders don't survive long. I had to project confidence even when I was terrified, make quick decisions even when I needed time to think, and live with the consequences of choices that affected hundreds of people. The money and respect that came with the position were intoxicating, but they came at a price that I was only beginning to understand. Every order I gave, every operation I approved, every conflict I escalated, all of it created ripple effects throughout the community that I couldn't control or predict. I was playing a game with rules I didn't fully understand, using pieces that were human lives, and the stakes kept getting higher with every move I made. For 2 years, I lived as the youngest shot caller in Watts, commanding respect and fear in equal measure. My daily routine involved managing drug operations worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, coordinating with other blood sets across Los Angeles, and making strategic decisions about territorial expansion and conflict resolution. I had soldiers who would die for me, rivals who wanted me dead, and a community that saw me as both a protector and a threat. The money allowed me to move my mother out of the projects and into a better neighborhood, though I could never tell her where the money came from. I bought her a car, paid for my younger sister's private school tuition, and made sure my family never wanted for anything material. But the emotional cost was devastating. I couldn't sleep without a gun under my pillow, couldn't walk anywhere without watching for enemies, couldn't trust anyone completely because betrayal was always a possibility. The paranoia was constant and exhausting. Every phone call could be a setup. Every meeting could be an ambush. Every day could be my last. I was living like a king in a kingdom built on violence, and the crown was getting heavier every day. The worst part was watching how my decisions affected other people's families, the mothers who lost sons, the children who grew up without fathers, the communities torn apart by wars I had helped escalate. The breaking point came during my 18th year as shot caller. A dispute over drug territory had escalated into a war between our set and a rival blood faction, and the violence was spiraling out of control. Bodies were dropping on both sides, innocent bystanders were getting caught in crossfire, and the police pressure was intensifying to the point where our operations were being severely disrupted. As the leader, it was my responsibility to find a solution, but every option seemed to lead to more violence. The other shot callers were pushing for an all-out war that would settle the dispute permanently, but I knew that such a conflict would destroy both sets and devastate the entire community. For the first time since becoming a leader, I found myself questioning whether the power I wielded was worth the destruction it caused. I started having nightmares about the people who had died because of my decisions, the families torn apart by conflicts I had escalated, the young men who had followed my orders into situations that got them killed or imprisoned. The weight of all those lives, all those consequences, all those ripple effects of violence, it was crushing my soul. I realized that being the youngest shot caller in Watts history wasn't an achievement to be proud of. It was a tragedy that had stolen my youth and turned me into something I never wanted to become. The moment that changed everything happened on a Tuesday afternoon when I was walking through the projects and saw a group of kids playing in the courtyard. They couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old, but they were throwing up gang signs and pretending to shoot each other with imaginary guns. When they saw me approaching, their faces lit up with admiration and excitement. "Shot caller! Shot caller!" they called out, running toward me like I was some kind of hero. One little boy, who reminded me of myself at that age, looked up at me with pure worship in his eyes and said, "When I grow up, I want to be just like you." In that moment, I saw myself clearly for the first time in years. I wasn't a leader or a protector or a hero. I was a cancer spreading through my own community, inspiring children to aspire to a life of violence and early death. These kids didn't see the nightmares, the paranoia, the guilt, or the fear that consumed my daily existence. They only saw the surface, the respect, the money, the power, and they wanted it for themselves. I realized that every day I remained in this position, I was serving as a role model for the next generation of gang members, perpetuating a cycle of violence that would claim their lives just as it had claimed so many others. That night, I made a decision that would shock everyone who knew me. I was going to step down as shot caller and find a way out of the life. Leaving the position of shot caller wasn't as simple as submitting a resignation letter. In the gang world, leadership positions are typically held until death, imprisonment, or forced removal due to incompetence or betrayal. The idea of voluntarily stepping down was almost unheard of, especially for someone as young and successful as I had been. I knew that my decision would be met with suspicion, anger, and possibly violence from both my own set and rival gangs who might see it as a sign of weakness to exploit. I began reaching out quietly to former gang members who had successfully transitioned out of the life, seeking advice and support for what I knew would be the most dangerous period of my existence. The process of extricating myself from gang leadership while staying alive required careful planning, strategic alliances, and a level of diplomacy that I had never needed before. I had to gradually transfer my responsibilities to other leaders, ensure that ongoing operations wouldn't be disrupted by my departure, and most importantly, convince everyone involved that my decision was based on strategic thinking rather than fear or betrayal. The irony wasn't lost on me that the same strategic skills that had made me an effective gang leader were now being used to plan my escape from that world. When I finally announced my intention to step down as shot caller, the reaction was explosive and immediate. Many of the older OGs saw my decision as a betrayal of everything the set stood for, a sign of weakness that could encourage other young leaders to abandon their responsibilities. Some of the younger soldiers who had looked up to me felt abandoned and confused, unable to understand why I would walk away from the power and respect that they desperately wanted for themselves. The most dangerous opposition came from rival gangs who interpreted my departure as an opportunity to strike at a weakened bounty hunter blood leadership structure. Several attempts were made on my life during the transition period, as enemies tried to eliminate me before I could fully extract myself from the organization. The stress of managing these threats while trying to maintain some semblance of normal life was overwhelming. I couldn't trust anyone completely, couldn't relax anywhere, couldn't make any moves without considering the potential consequences for both myself and my family. My mother, who had never fully understood the extent of my involvement in gang activities, began to realize the danger I was in when security measures around our home had to be dramatically increased. The look of fear and disappointment in her eyes was more painful than any physical threat I faced. The 6 months it took to fully transition out of gang leadership were the most dangerous of my life. Every day brought new challenges, new threats, and new tests of my resolve to leave the life behind. I had to carefully manage the transfer of my operations to other leaders while ensuring that none of them felt threatened by my continued presence in the neighborhood. Rival gangs were constantly probing for weaknesses, testing whether my departure had created opportunities for territorial expansion or revenge attacks. The police, who had been tracking my activities for years, were suspicious of my sudden withdrawal from visible gang activities and increased their surveillance, convinced that I was planning something significant. During this period, I survived 3 assassination attempts, lost several friends who were killed in retaliatory strikes, and watched as the power vacuum created by my departure led to increased violence within the set. The guilt of knowing that my decision to leave had contributed to the chaos and bloodshed was almost unbearable. There were nights when I considered returning to my leadership position just to restore stability, but I knew that doing so would trap me in the cycle of violence forever. The only way forward was through the darkness, no matter how painful or dangerous the journey became. Successfully leaving gang leadership required more than just stepping down from my position. It required rebuilding my entire identity from the ground up. For 5 years, I had been defined by my role as a shot caller, my reputation as a strategist, and my status within the bounty hunter bloods. Without those external markers of identity, I had to figure out who Darius really was beneath all the layers of gang affiliation and street credibility. I enrolled in community college using money I had saved from my illegal activities, determined to get the education I had abandoned when I joined the gang. The transition from commanding respect through fear to earning respect through academic achievement was humbling and difficult. My classmates had no idea about my past, and I worked hard to keep it that way. But the skills I had developed as a gang leader, strategic thinking, crisis management, leadership under pressure, proved surprisingly valuable in legitimate contexts. I started working with community organizations that focused on gang intervention and youth development, using my experience and credibility to reach young people who were facing the same choices I had faced years earlier. The work was dangerous because it required me to maintain connections to the gang world while trying to help people escape from it. But it was also deeply fulfilling in ways that power and money had never been. 2 years after leaving my position as shot caller, I received news that shattered the fragile peace I had built in my new life. My replacement as leader had been killed in a drive-by shooting, and the resulting power struggle was tearing the bounty hunter bloods apart from within. Several of the young men I had mentored and trained were now dead, victims of the same cycle of violence that I had helped perpetuate during my time in leadership. The guilt was overwhelming. I felt responsible for their deaths because I had taught them the skills and mindset that ultimately got them killed. At the same time, I realized that staying in the gang would have likely resulted in my own death by now, and that my departure, however painful for others, had probably saved my life. This realization forced me to confront the complex moral reality of gang involvement. There are no purely good or evil choices, only decisions with different sets of consequences. And sometimes survival requires making choices that hurt other people. I began attending therapy to deal with the trauma and guilt of my past, something that would have been unthinkable during my time as a gang leader. The process of healing was slow and painful, but it was necessary if I was going to build a meaningful life beyond the streets. Over the past 8 years since leaving gang leadership, I've dedicated my life to preventing other young people from making the same mistakes I made. Working with community organizations, schools, and law enforcement agencies, I've shared my story with thousands of at-risk youth across Los Angeles and beyond. The response has been overwhelming. Young people who were on the verge of joining gangs have changed their minds after hearing about the real cost of that life. Parents have gained new insights into what their children are facing. And even some active gang members have reached out for help leaving the life behind. The most meaningful moments come when I meet young people who remind me of myself at 14. Angry, desperate for belonging, convinced that gang membership is their only path to respect and security. When I can show them alternatives, when I can help them see that there are other ways to find purpose and community, when I can convince them that their lives have value beyond what they can do for a gang, those are the moments that make all the pain and struggle worthwhile. I can't undo the damage I caused during my years as a shot caller, but I can work to ensure that fewer young people follow the same destructive path. Every life saved, every family kept together, every young person who chooses education over initiation. That's my redemption. If there's one thing I want you to understand from my story, it's that power without wisdom is destruction, and wisdom without experience is just theory. I became the youngest shot caller in Watts history, not because I was ready for that responsibility, but because circumstances forced me into a position that no teenager should ever have to handle. The respect I commanded was built on fear, the loyalty I inspired was based on intimidation, and the success I achieved came at the cost of my humanity and the lives of people I cared about. Real leadership isn't about having the power to make others do what you want. It's about having the wisdom to make decisions that benefit everyone involved, including your enemies. Real strength isn't about being willing to use violence. It's about being strong enough to find peaceful solutions to conflicts that seem impossible to resolve. Real respect isn't something you can demand or enforce. It's something you earn through consistent actions that demonstrate your character and integrity. The gang life promises you shortcuts to all of these things, but shortcuts always come with hidden costs that aren't apparent until it's too late to change course. The power I wielded as a shot caller was an illusion. I thought I was in control, but I was actually trapped in a system that was using me just as much as I was using it. To the young people watching this who might be considering gang involvement, or who are already in the life but having doubts, listen to me carefully. Everything the streets promise you is a lie wrapped in just enough truth to make it believable. They promise you respect, but the respect you get is based on fear, and fear-based respect disappears the moment you show any weakness. They promise you money, but most gang members live in poverty, while their leaders get rich off their labor and sacrifice. They promise you family, but they will sacrifice you without hesitation if it serves their interests. They promise you power, but you become a slave to a system that controls every aspect of your life. Most importantly, they promise you a future, but gang membership is a dead-end path that leads to only 3 destinations: prison, death, or a lifetime of looking over your shoulder. I know it's hard to believe when you're surrounded by poverty and violence, when it feels like the gang is the only option available, when legitimate opportunities seem impossible to access. But I'm living proof that there are alternatives. There are educational programs, job training opportunities, mentorship programs, and communities of people who will support you without asking you to hurt others. The path out of poverty and powerlessness doesn't have to go through gang membership. To the parents, grandparents, and family members who are watching their loved ones get pulled into gang life, I see you, I understand your pain, and I want you to know that there is hope. My mother never gave up on me, even when I was at my most dangerous and destructive. She kept praying, kept loving, kept believing that the boy she raised was still somewhere inside the gang leader I had become. Her faith in my humanity was one of the things that eventually helped me find my way back to myself. Don't give up on your children, no matter how far they seem to have fallen. Keep showing them love, keep setting boundaries, keep offering alternatives, and keep believing in their capacity to change. At the same time, don't blame yourself for their choices. Gang recruitment is sophisticated and targeted, designed to exploit the vulnerabilities that exist in every young person's life. You didn't fail as a parent. Society failed to provide adequate alternatives to the streets. Look for warning signs: new friends you've never met, unexplained money or expensive items, changes in behavior or language, reluctance to go certain places or wear certain colors. If your child is already involved, don't try to handle it alone. Reach out to community organizations, former gang members, law enforcement. anyone who can help you navigate this nightmare safely. For anyone who needs help getting out of gang life or preventing gang involvement, there are resources available. Organizations like Homeboy Industries, the Gang Intervention Program, and local community centers offer support, job training, and protection for people trying to leave the streets. Many cities have former gang members who work as intervention specialists, people who understand the life because they've lived it and can provide guidance based on real experience rather than theory. Educational programs, vocational training, and mentorship opportunities exist in most communities, though they may require some searching to find. The key is reaching out before the situation becomes desperate, because leaving gang life becomes exponentially more dangerous the deeper you get involved. For families dealing with gang involvement, organizations like Mothers Against Gang Violence and community-based intervention programs can provide guidance and support. Remember, leaving gang life isn't just about walking away. It's about rebuilding your entire identity, learning new skills, and finding new communities. It takes time, support, and tremendous courage, but it is possible. I'm proof of that. And so are thousands of other former gang members who have chosen life over death, building over destroying, hope over despair. Looking back on my time as the youngest shot caller in Watts history, I realized that I was never really a leader. I was just a kid with a gun who had learned how to use fear and violence to get compliance from others. Real leadership requires emotional intelligence, moral courage, and the wisdom to make decisions that benefit everyone involved, not just yourself and your immediate circle. The kind of leadership I practiced in the gang was actually the opposite of true leadership. It was manipulation, intimidation, and exploitation disguised as strength and authority. True leaders inspire people to become better versions of themselves, create opportunities for others to succeed, and build systems that outlast their own involvement. Gang leadership does the opposite. It traps people in cycles of violence and destruction, limits their opportunities for growth and development, and creates systems that consume the very people they claim to protect. If you're a young person who feels called to leadership, who wants to make a difference in your community, who has the intelligence and charisma to influence others, use those gifts for construction, not destruction. The world needs leaders who can solve problems without violence, who can build bridges instead of walls, who can create hope instead of fear. The work I do now, speaking to young people and working with intervention programs, isn't just about preventing gang involvement. It's about showing people that their past doesn't have to define their future. I meet kids who have already made mistakes, who think they're too far gone to change, who believe that violence is their only option for gaining respect and security. I tell them about my time as the youngest shot caller in Watts, about the power I wielded and the price I paid for it, about the darkness I lived in and the light I eventually found. Some of them listen immediately. Some take time to process what they've heard, and others reject the message entirely. But every single person who chooses a different path, every family that stays together, every young person who picks up a book instead of a gun, that's a victory against the forces that tried to destroy us all. The gang leaders who use children as soldiers, the systems that fail our young people, the cycles of poverty and violence that seem impossible to break. They want us to believe that change is impossible, that once you're in the life, you're trapped forever. But we prove them wrong every day, one story at a time, one choice at a time, one life at a time. The ripple effects of positive change are just as powerful as the ripple effects of violence, but they take longer to see and require more patience to cultivate. Before I finish my story, I need something from you. If this video has impacted you in any way, if it's made you think differently about gang life, about leadership, about the choices young people face in difficult circumstances, I need you to share it. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and most importantly, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe it's a young person in your family who's struggling with these choices. Maybe it's a parent who's trying to understand what their child is going through. Maybe it's a community leader who's looking for ways to address gang violence and youth development. Your share could save a life. Your comment could reach someone who's feeling hopeless. Your engagement helps this message reach more people who need to hear that change is possible, that leadership can be positive, that power can be used for construction instead of destruction. I also want to hear from you in the comments. Tell me your thoughts, your experiences, your questions. Whether you agree with everything I've said or not, Whether my story resonates with you or challenges you, I want to know. This conversation doesn't end when the video stops. It continues in the comments, in the discussions you have with your families, in the choices you make going forward. So please take a moment right now to engage with this content. To anyone watching this who is currently in a position of leadership within a gang, who feels trapped by the expectations and responsibilities that come with that role, I want you to know that you have more power than you realize. You have the power to choose differently, to use your influence for positive change, to break cycles instead of perpetuating them. It won't be easy, and it will require more courage than any act of violence you've ever committed, but it is possible. You are not condemned to repeat the same patterns forever. You are not defined by the worst decisions you've made. You are not too far gone to change direction. I was the youngest shot caller in Watts history, responsible for decisions that led to deaths, destruction, and devastation throughout my community. If I can find redemption, if I can rebuild my life around positive values, if I can use my experience to help others instead of hurt them, then so can you. The first step is believing that you deserve better, that your life has value beyond what you can do for a gang, that you have something positive to contribute to the world. The second step is reaching out for help. There are people waiting to support you, communities ready to embrace you, and opportunities available that you might not even know exist. The third step is taking action, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one breath at a time. My name is Darius, and for 3 years I was the youngest shot caller in the history of the bounty hunter bloods in Watts. Today, I choose to be known as someone who helps young people find alternatives to the streets, who works to break cycles of violence and destruction, who believes in the power of redemption and second chances. This is my story, my testimony, and my warning. Gang leadership isn't about power. It's about being trapped in a system that will consume you and everyone you care about. Real leadership is about lifting others up, not tearing them down. Real power is about creating positive change, not perpetuating cycles of violence. But there is hope, there are alternatives, and there is help available for anyone brave enough to reach for it. If this video has impacted you, please don't just watch and move on. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Leave a comment telling me your thoughts, your story, or your questions. Whether you agree with me or not, whether my story inspires you or challenges you, I want to hear from you. Your engagement helps this message reach more people, and your voice adds to the conversation that can save lives. Remember, every choice you make matters, every day is a chance to choose differently, and every person has the power to change their story. Thank you for listening, thank you for caring, and thank you for being part of the solution.